Welcome to Revenge with Lyra.
To teach me a lesson, Dad sent me to handle a $1 million business deal he thought I'd ruin. MOM laughed and told everyone she won't last 5 minutes in that meeting. But the next morning, when he walked into the office and saw the headlines, he froze. My name is Harper Lane, I'm 27. And if you think you know how this ends, stay tuned. What do you do when the people who raised you mistake your intelligence for rebellion, when their lesson becomes the very thing that sets you free? That morning, Dad had tossed the folder across the dining table. You want to prove yourself? Fine. Represent us at the Portland merger. Let's see what happens when real money's on the line. Mom snorted behind her teacup. She'll panic halfway through and embarrass us all. I smiled, calm but burning. Challenge accepted. By midnight, I'd read the 200-page contract twice, highlighted every clause my father's lawyer had missed, and memorized the competing firms' board members. My coffee table was buried in notes and sticky tabs. My cat, Leo, slept on the non-disclosure agreement like a furry paperweight. At 9 a.m., I walked into the marble-walled conference room wearing the same navy suit my father once called too ambitious. 12 men in tailored gray turned to look at me. The youngest in the room, the only woman. The chairman leaned forward. "Where's Mr. Lane?" "He sent me," I said evenly, sliding the contract across the table. He thought I should learn what competence looks like. The meeting lasted 3 hours. By the end, I'd negotiated a 12% increase in the partnership rate and secured exclusivity on our intellectual property, a clause Dad never even thought to request. When I left, the CEO of the rival firm shook my hand. "You just saved your father $2 million. That night, I drafted a press release. By sunrise, every major business outlet carried the same headline. Harper Lane finalizes landmark merger, youngest negotiator in company history. And somewhere in my parents' kitchen, the laughter had stopped. I arrived at the office at 8:05 a.m. sharp. The moment I stepped out of the elevator, silence rippled through the hallway like a shockwave. Assistants froze mid-conversation. A few associates avoided eye contact completely. On the glass wall of Dad's office, a copy of Forbes Business Daily was taped, the headline blaring in bold. Harper Lane secures historic merger. Lane Industries enters new era. Dad was standing by his desk, the paper in one hand, his phone in the other. When he saw me, his jaw tightened. "You went to the press?" I set my bag down calmly. The PR team issued the release. Standard procedure after a major deal. "I copied you on the email." Mom's voice came through from the speakerphone. "Harper, do you realize what you've done? Everyone's calling, asking why you led the meeting instead of your father." "That's because I did," I replied. And the deal closed successfully. Dad exhaled sharply, lowering himself into his chair. "You could have jeopardized everything. That merger was meant to humble you, not make headlines." The words hit harder than I expected, but I didn't flinch. "You didn't send me to learn. You sent me to fail. I just didn't cooperate." For a moment, there was only the hum of the air conditioner. Then, unexpectedly, Dad chuckled a low, grudging sound. "You're just like your mother." "Correction," I said, stepping closer. "I'm like the woman Mom used to be before she started believing your opinion was gospel." He looked up, startled. I leaned over the desk, meeting his eyes. "From now on, when you introduce me, don't say, 'my daughter, who's still learning.' Say, 'my partner, who just saved my company.'" I turned toward the door, heels sharp against the floor. As I passed the reception desk, one of the junior analysts whispered, "That was legendary." I smiled without slowing. For once, my worth wasn't a question. It was a headline. By noon, the entire Lane Industries building was buzzing. News stations wanted interviews, shareholders wanted statements, and Dad wanted silence. Unfortunately for him, silence wasn't trending. When I entered the conference room for the emergency board meeting, the directors were already gathered, most of them men who had known me since I was a teenager sneaking homework under the table during Dad's meetings. Their expressions were polite but cautious. Dad cleared his throat. "Let's make something clear. Yesterday's deal doesn't change the structure of this company." Harper's success was commendable, but she's still learning. One director, Mrs. Owens, the only other woman in the room, raised an eyebrow. With respect, Richard, she negotiated better terms than anyone on your executive team has in 5 years. Maybe the structure should change. Murmurs followed. Dad's jaw tightened. This isn't about ego. It's about experience. I spoke before he could continue. Experience isn't measured in age. It's measured in outcomes. And if outcomes are what matter, let's look at the numbers. I pulled up the presentation I'd prepared overnight. Charts, projections, and the financial gains from the merger filled the screen. Projected growth, up 24%. Liability reduction, down 17%. And media coverage has doubled our market exposure in 12 hours. The room fell silent again, but this time, it wasn't resistance. It was realization. Mrs. Owens smiled faintly. I'd say the experience speaks for itself. When the meeting adjourned, Dad walked past me without a word. But later that afternoon, I overheard him in his office telling a client, my daughter handled the merger. His tone wasn't proud, not yet, but it wasn't dismissive either. That night, as I locked up my office, a text came from an unknown number. You made them listen. Don't stop now. No name, just the truth I already knew. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the student. I was the standard. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying every word from the boardroom, every startled glance, every half-swallowed compliment. I sat on my apartment balcony overlooking downtown Portland, city lights flickering like distant applause. For years, I'd been told I was too ambitious, too emotional, too young. Yet here I was, the reason our company's name was trending for the first time in a decade. At 2 a.m., my phone buzzed. A notification, Lane Industries stock up 9.4% overnight. I stared at the screen, half in disbelief, half in vindication. Then another alert, press request. CNBC Morning Brief wants comment from Harper Lane. By sunrise, my email inbox looked like an explosion. Interview offers, speaking invitations, sponsorship inquiries. I brewed coffee, slipped on my blazer, and watched the first rays of light crawl across my desk. That's when a new message arrived from Dad's personal account. Be in the office by 9. We need to discuss your future here. No congratulations. No, I'm proud of you. Just an agenda item. When I walked in, Mom was already seated in the corner, phone in hand, pretending not to be shaken. Dad gestured for me to sit. You made an impression, I'll give you that, he said. But don't let it go to your head. You work for me. I leaned back in my chair. Actually, Dad, I work with you, unless you're saying partnership doesn't apply to family? He frowned. What exactly are you asking for? Recognition? I said. In writing. Mom sighed, as if I were a child asking for dessert. Oh, Harper, you don't negotiate with your parents. I smiled. Then maybe you shouldn't have raised a negotiator. The silence that followed was thick enough to touch. For the first time, my father didn't know what to say, and that was victory enough for me. The boardroom smelled faintly of espresso and tension. Dad sat at the head of the table, flanked by his legal counsel and 2 senior partners. I walked in, calm and measured, carrying nothing but a folder and a quiet confidence that seemed to irritate him more than any argument could. Sit, he said tersely. I'll stand, I replied. He exchanged a look with Mom, then leaned forward. Let's be realistic, Harper. You're talented, sure. But leadership takes time, and this publicity stunt you've caused. It wasn't a stunt, I interrupted. It was strategy. The merger's success boosted our valuation and restored investor confidence. That's not chaos. That's competence. Mrs. Owens, the only board member I trusted, folded her hands. Richard, she's right. This company needed momentum. She provided it. Dad's jaw flexed. We can't just hand her power. Then call it accountability, I said, sliding a document onto the table. A proposal for a new division, Lane Digital Initiatives. I'll run it independently, using the merger's profit margins to fund it. It keeps your legacy intact while letting me build my own. Mom frowned. Why can't you just be grateful for what your father's given you? I met her gaze. Because gratitude shouldn't require silence. The room went still. Even the hum of the air conditioner seemed to hold its breath. After a long pause, Dad finally said, "You'll be responsible for every dollar you spend." "Good," I replied. "I already am." As I turned to leave, Mrs. Owens smiled faintly. "Congratulations, Director Lane." Outside the boardroom, I stopped for a moment, exhaling a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. For the first time in years, I wasn't fighting to be seen. I was leading, and the world had already noticed. The announcement hit the internal network by noon. Lane Industries launches new digital division led by Harper Lane. Within minutes, congratulatory messages started flooding my inbox, some genuine, some strategic. I sat in my new glass-walled office, the one that used to store archived files, now transformed with clean lines and bright light. A temporary space, but mine. My nameplate still smelled of fresh polish. Mom texted, "Your father's trying to act proud, but you know how he is. He says this pressure will eat you alive." I smiled, replying simply, "Good. Pressure makes diamonds." The next few days were a blur of work, assembling a team, designing frameworks, pitching innovation projects the old board had never dared to attempt. The division hummed with the sound of new ideas, keyboards, and the faint rhythm of change. Then came Friday's investor dinner. I walked in wearing a black tailored suit. Dad introduced me stiffly to the partners. "This is my daughter, Harper Lane. She's handling our digital ventures." For a moment, I saw pride flash in his eyes before it quickly hid behind control. During dessert, one investor leaned toward him. "Richard, if this is the future of Lane Industries, you're in good hands." Dad's smile faltered. I caught it. I always did. Back home that night, I opened an old notebook filled with his notes on how to command respect. On the last page, I added my own line. "Command isn't taken. It's earned, and sometimes inherited power has to be reclaimed." When I closed the notebook, Leo brushed against my leg, purring softly. Outside, the skyline glittered like opportunity. I wasn't just part of the company anymore. I was the reason it was alive. A week later, Lane Industries was trending again, not for scandal or failure this time, but for innovation. Our pilot project had secured a $4.5 million partnership with a Silicon Valley tech firm, all negotiated under the Lane Digital Initiatives banner. The press called it the next chapter of Lane leadership. Dad didn't call it anything. He just stopped showing up to my department meetings. Mom, meanwhile, started calling more than ever, soft voice, emotional guilt. "Honey, your father's under stress. You could ease things if you showed a little humility." I sipped my coffee and answered evenly, "Mom, I don't know humility for doing my job well." She sighed. "You've changed." "Yes," I said, and that's the point. That Friday, the partners hosted a celebration dinner. Champagne flowed, laughter filled the penthouse restaurant, and I felt something I'd never known inside this family name, belonging earned by merit. Mrs. Owens raised her glass. "To Harper, the reason this company's heartbeat sounds new again." Applause followed. I caught Dad's expression from across the table, conflicted pride, the kind that hurts more than envy because it admits defeat. After dessert, he approached quietly. "You made quite a show tonight," he said. "Just results," I replied. "The same thing you've always demanded." He studied me for a long moment. "You really think you can run this company one day?" I smiled faintly. "I already am. You just haven't accepted it yet." When I left the restaurant, the city air felt electric, like standing on the edge of everything I'd fought for. My reflection in the glass door showed someone I didn't recognize at first. Confident, calm, capable. The kind of leader he'd spent a lifetime doubting could exist, especially in his daughter. The Monday after the celebration felt like the quiet before a new season. The newspaper on Dad's desk read, "Lane Industries appoints Harper Lane as co-CEO to drive modernization strategy." He hadn't even told me. The board had voted over the weekend, led by Mrs. Owens and the investors I'd won through the merger. When I walked into his office, he was staring at the headline, his hands motionless on either side of the page. "You knew this was coming," I said softly. He looked up, eyes tired. "I thought I could control how it happened." I set down 2 cups of coffee. "You taught me to negotiate, to calculate, to win. You just didn't expect me to apply those lessons here." He gave a slow, reluctant nod. "Maybe I underestimated you. Or maybe," I said, "you never really looked." The air between us settled, not hostile, just honest. For the first time in years, there was no hierarchy in the room, only recognition. By noon, the announcement went live. Reporters gathered in the lobby, flashes bouncing off glass walls. I stepped up to the podium beside Dad. The cameras clicked, a rhythm like thunder. "Lane Industries," I began, "isn't changing direction. It's expanding its vision. The next generation of leadership isn't about replacing tradition. It's about redefining it." The applause was immediate. Dad extended his hand for a shake. Instead, I hugged him, brief, professional, human. The room erupted again. That night, I returned to my apartment, kicked off my heels, and sank into the couch. Leo leapt into my lap, purring like approval. Mom texted one final message. "We're proud of you, Harper," even if it took us too long to say it. I smiled, setting the phone aside. Through the window, Portland glowed, steel and light reflecting a story rewritten. I'd started